Welcome to Coffee with Democrats, a sensible platform for progressive conversations. Coffee with Democrats is a grassroots movement dedicated to hearing from Democrats, candidates, legislators, and friends from all political backgrounds who want great conversations. Coffee with Democrats is committed to increase Democrat voter registration and Democrat voter turnout by making voting more exciting and meaningful. And now here's your host of Coffee with Democrats, Kevin Dawson.
How's that?
There you go.
All right. I apologize, Governor Walters. We are having some technical difficulties on our side. And what I'm having on my side, and I've got an earpiece in so you don't hear the background noise. This is going backwards like 5 minutes ago, and it's putting audio back in from 5 minutes ago back into my ear. So I'm hearing the same conversation that I had 5 minutes ago while trying to listen to you at the same time. And we are extremely sorry that this is happening, but this should be an easy process, but it's turning out to be really a difficult process. But we are so thankful to have you with us on Coffee with Democrats today, Governor Walters. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be with us. I'm not sure whether you can see my screen or not, but I've got a list of questions for you. And we want to talk extensively with you, but this is Coffee with Democrats. So welcome to Coffee with Democrats, and we want to give you an opportunity to talk to us just a little bit about what your favorite coffee is.
Oh, I've got these coffee makers in my home. I've got two different brands, and so I bounce around with a variety of different heavy, dark roast coffees. I did a lot of business in the Dominican Republic and have been in parts of the world where you give them €1 and you get a stout shot of coffee. So I gravitate to any strong dark roast coffee.
Well, excellent. It seems like the audio may have corrected itself. It's either corrected itself or we're in that 5-minute lag where I was muted. And so we're going to continue to move forward with this conversation. So again, please, we apologize, but please bear with us because you're such an important person to us that we want to have this opportunity to have this conversation with you. So I wanted everybody to know a little bit about who David Walters is. A brief biography of Governor Walters is, in contrast, Governor Walters is a very young man. He's an American businessman. He was born in 1951. And put that in perspective, we're within 10 years of one another. That to me is a very good statement. He was the 24th governor of the state of Oklahoma. He started his governor's term, if I get my math correct, at the age of 39 years old. And he was the governor from 1991 to 1994. He is from a small town in Oklahoma, Canute, Oklahoma, out in west just off of I-40. He was the project manager for Governor David Boren and the youngest executive officer working for the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center, which I know the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center very well. As a graduate of the University of Oklahoma, it's something I have a lot of pride with. He also worked in commercial real estate as governor. This is one of his hallmarks is the increased education funding. And he currently works as the CEO of Walters Power International, a global provider of local power. So as we get into the question and answer session of this, Governor Walters, I wanted to ask you about to contrast your gubernatorial platform and how that contrasts with Governor Kevin Stitt's.
Well, that's a good question. I've got, in many respects, we're somewhat similar because we come out of a business environment. Neither one of us has ever held political office before we got elected. And we're quite young at the time we took office. And so But sadly, that's where the similarities end. I knew quite a bit about state government, so I had worked as the associate provost at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, and prior to that as associate VP down at OU. And so I knew the higher education system, and in that capacity had worked a lot with state agencies trying to lobby for, additional capital dollars, which we were very successful at the Health Science Center. I was really blessed to be there at a time when we had a lot of growth and new library building, new biomedical sciences building, the whole parking structure system, the College of Nursing, all of that came along, finished up the College of Dentistry building. All of that happened during that short period of time. So, so I knew something about that. And then George and I reached out and asked me when I was, I was still wet behind the ears. I'm probably, 32 or so, to be the chair of the Department of Human Services Commission, which is a voluntary job. But I learned a whole bunch about state agencies, and I kind of came away from all of that experience with the impression that the solutions aren't as complicated as we frequently make them out to be. The solutions are simply require somebody to be courageous enough to go propose what the proper thing to do is, and then to try to sell that notion. I was a little shocked when I got into office how little decisions had to do with merit. It was oftentimes just a balancing of political interests and who was for what, and seeing if you could get enough various political interests on one side or the other. And so we tried to offer up meritorious ideas and justify those. The big difference, I think, is that we reached out to collaborate a lot. I had a democratically controlled legislature. We fought like cats and dogs, sort of like stiff fights with the Republicans, but we were willing to find the right solution, and as a result, we just got a lot done and got a lot passed, and very significant things. And this was before the age where you'd make up problems like CRT and the all kinds of ills of the public school system, or all of these kind of right-wing dog whistles. And so fortunately we didn't have to contend with that as much, and there was a broader audience for us, I think, as we would propose in many cases pretty significant change. I will say, particularly on Native American sovereign nations in Oklahoma, I was the first governor to basically go to Tahlequah, Oklahoma, early in my term in office in 1991, and give a speech that said, I accept the sovereign status of our Native American tribes. Oddly enough, no governor before me had said that. There's always this contention. The governor's office always had attorneys. Henry Bellman, who I followed, had something like 7 law firms on board. And so it was always a contentious fight with the tribes over, tobacco shops and this, that, and the other. So I recognize these 39 tribes as being engines of economic opportunity, really, that they were going to be great focal points for growth. And so we negotiated in 1992 a tobacco compact. There hadn't really been such a thing in terms of coming up with a program. So we legitimized their tobacco shops, and they provided taxes to us. And with that little start, we were able to float a $300 million bond issue in early 90s. That was a lot of money. We built a building on every college campus in Oklahoma. We started the fiber backbone that crossed the state at the time, called OneNet. So a lot came out of that effort that was just as a result of the cooperation, a little bit of cooperation with the tribes. We went on to negotiate the gambling compacts, but we did that with a couple of smaller tribes, and we had just got federal approval for those at the time that my term ended. But other governors after me picked up where we left off and carried that forward, so that today, if you take the top 3 Native American tribes in Oklahoma, they've got a budget bigger than the state of Oklahoma, and they are very well run. They have different forms of government, but they're all very responsibly run, and they build roads and highways. If it weren't for them, we wouldn't have rural health care. They provide direct support for public schools. I think the Cherokees Fund provide grant support for 160 public schools in their region. And, it's just what the Chickasaws have done in and around Oklahoma City, the OCAM development, the First Americans Museum, the rest of that is all just extraordinary, the amount of economic growth. And so the big divergence with Governor Stitt and our policy is that we reached out, brought all the tribal leaders in. I remember we didn't have a meeting facility at the mansion. We had to put up a big tent. So we had a big tent, and we invited everybody in. I put my whole cabinet up at the front stage, and I said, look, we're not going to give you any speeches. We're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to tell you what we think the problems are. There's a microphone, and we want to hear from each of you. And that if fast forward, we probably would have called that a listening session. Nobody was using that terminology, but we just sat there and listened all day, took a lot of notes, and out of that came, as I said, the Tobacco Compact and a lot of other cooperative efforts. So collaboration, you can't run it like a business. It isn't a business. You
Right.
don't own it. You've got a lot of different stakeholders in it. You got to reach out. I'd bring the Republicans over to the governor's mansion and sit with them for breakfast and, try to talk with them to find common ground. And that's how you're effective. And
Right.
you got to convince people to do what you want them to do, but they have to want to do it. You can't bludgeon them like, you can't tell the tribes, okay, I want you to do this. And if you don't do this, I'm going to take you to federal court. Well, that obviously shows a lot of disrespect and is unproductive and very expensive.
So with us in our meeting today is Representative Mickey Dollens from Oklahoma City.
Hey, Mickey, how are you?
I wanted to see if Mickey had a few questions for you, if you wanted to join in and ask a couple of questions for you.
Yeah, the first thing Mickey wants to know is why I didn't make his fundraiser recently. And I'm sorry about that, Mickey. I should have.
I'm going to ask to unmute. There, that should come across.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, I have a voice now.
Yeah, I like the visual.
Thank you, Kevin. Welcome, Governor Walters. It's okay. I'm sure we're going to have another fundraiser so you can redeem yourself in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Just double the donation, and I'll forgive you.
Yeah.
Governor Walters, I was just, listening to your story. I find it fascinating. You were elected when you were 39 years old. Is there a particular campaign story that really stands out from those younger days when you ran for governor?
Oh, a lot of them. I remember announcing for office out in Western Oklahoma in front of my family's 1,500 square foot home. I don't think it was that big, but it raised 5 boys and on a 160 acre cotton farm. And so I was so nervous and that my hands were trembling as I was trying to announce that I was running for governor. And so it was, I think a lot of people watched that announcement. Thank God there wasn't thousands. There were a few hundred local residents that showed up for that. And of course, my family, my parents were alive at that time. And it was kind of interesting that as I went forward, I ran for the right reasons. I was frustrated with the lack of progress in the state. This was back during one of our oil and gas declines, and funding was down everywhere, and I just didn't think it was. I didn't think the decisions were that hard to make. They just needed to be made based on merit. And so, as I told that story around the state, it took hold, and this was 1986, and so in 1986 I ran. I announced in May for primary during and went into a primary fight with poor old Mike Turpin, and I defeated Mike Turpin in a shocking upset because Mike had been campaigning hard for the nomination for 4 years, and I show up out of the middle of nowhere, and so it was heartbreaking for him. Fortunately, we became great friends out of the process. And then he was one of my great supporters in 1990, and then was a great help all during my administration. But you know, I was, and so when I ran first against Henry Bellman. Mike and I fought valiantly to see who would get beat by Henry Bellman, and I almost beat Henry Bellman. And so I was probably too young at that point, you know, at 35, but it was a hell of a campaign, and we raised a lot of money, and we ignited a lot of young people who had not yet been in politics. They were inspired to come help us, and they all came back in 1990 campaign, and then we carried all the counties except 2 up in the Panhandle. I threatened to give them away to Texas as a joke one time that made a headline up in Guyman, but we carried all the counties, and all 75. We carried 75 of the 77 counties, and had a great victory. So that's a synopsis of that. I don't recall any particular incident that was wild and crazy. We'd get lost a lot. We wound up in Arkansas one time, you know, on and on. But we ran a hard fought campaign.
One of the stories that I enjoyed hearing from you when we were in Tulsa together was the story about you and Beto O'Rourke taking off and going out to Western Oklahoma for a disaster that had taken place out there, and that was you know, the wealth of knowledge that you have and the experiences that you have. It's just it's just amazing, and we should have a book about Governor Walters on the shelves any day now.
Yeah. Well, you know, Beto, I've always liked Beto. He's an inspiring thought leader, if you will, for the progressive movement. And so when he reached out to us, and we set up a little reception for him in Oklahoma City, he on the spur of the moment invited me to go with him to tour. We actually went east, Kevin. We went east to Tulsa to tour the flood ravaged area in West Tulsa, and so with Commissioner Karen Keith and Beto O'Rourke and I, we toured the homes, and man, to watch him, you know, those are always photo opportunities and opportunities to get some press, but the depth of his compassion for the folks, he would sit down and just you know, talk through their lives, try to give them comfort, you know, shed a tear here and there, but it was very impressive. And so if you could wave a wand and make somebody president, Beto O'Rourke would be a great one to consider. But yeah, it was a wonderful day to see really a well-motivated national candidate in operation. And in my day, I traveled with Mike Dukakis in Massachusetts prior to his run for president, and I got to know him well. And then Howard Dean actually used me as a surrogate in Iowa, so that I would show up with the other announced candidates and give a speech on behalf of Howard Dean when he got double booked. And so I've been privileged to be involved at a level that has given me a great perspective on politics and public policy.
We've got another question from Representative Dollens, and I just want to add one more thing before we go to him. Is we have Representative Mauree Turner with us on here as well, and if she has questions or wants to make a comment, I want her to encourage her to do that. But Mickey, go ahead.
Governor Walters, going back to the early days of your campaign, what do you think set your campaign apart from a seasoned politico like Turpin? And what are some of the pointers you could give to candidates right now that worked for you back then that are, you know, evergreen? Some things never change. So what really stood your campaign out against a seasoned politico like Mike Turpin?
You know, I was I was kind of the new fresh faced guy. Mike was young as well, but you know, he had been in the public eye a lot more, and Henry Bellman was on the other side. And so I was the guy that I remember meeting Barry Switzer I chased him down in Norman, went and sat down with him and said, here's why I'm running. And then later he told the press that if he had a job to fill, and he'd interviewed Henry Bellman and Mike Turpin and me, he'd hire me. Well, that was back in his zenith days. And so that made people pay attention. I remember that Mike Turpin used to say, hey, I'm high touch and he's high tech. Well, that was at a time when people were pretty interested in high tech. And so it was, I think, but more to your point, Mickey, I think what we were so kind of wrapped up in the issues that we put out an issue paper, what we wanted to do in education. We put what we wanted to do about job creation. We put one out about Native American tribes. And so I literally had an issue box in my car. And if somebody wanted to know where we stood on things, this is, websites were there, but not quite there. And so we were able to, I think, focus on a real plan of action for how we intended to turn Oklahoma around. And that was still at the time when we were just getting bludgeoned by economic decline. And so people responded to that, I think. I don't know if they, we now live in a non-fact-based world where people say whatever they're going to say. It's much more tribal. But I have to believe that it's okay to criticize the other side and to point out how badly they're mishandling things. I'm so furious about the mismanagement of the rural connectivity dollars, where they've got $1 billion from Uncle Joe to connect. And if there was anything important, I come from this little small town of 300 people. If there's anything that's going to help education out there, that's going to help economic development, that's going to help just with stem the population decline, it's having high-speed connectivity. And here you've got the Republican leadership sitting on $1 billion, wringing their hands as to, well, maybe we should spend it like this, maybe we should spend it like that. So I just think there's still room for that. I think we should. The progressives need to be a party of reform. Stamping out corruption that exists in government. We saw a lot of that highlighted in the last campaign cycle, and I think not everybody in politics is corrupt, thank God, but there are some corrupt actions that need to be made visible and rooted out, and we need to be a reform party. And then we need to stand for all the important things like, respecting others and diversity and education and healthcare and great infrastructure. And if you look back, the governors that have led that charge and the legislative majorities have always been Democratic.
Oh, yeah.
I think somebody had their hand up.
That was Mickey. Moving on to the next set of questions here. The current state of the Oklahoma Department of Public Education. We want to talk a little bit about that. Oklahoma ranks 34th in teacher pay, 45th in pupil expenditures, 37th in per capita income. More troubling is 60% of Oklahoma students live in poverty. Over 20% of high school students do not graduate. Oklahoma's reading scores have declined consistently. And we got to put this in perspective. They were declining. That it's kind of a place where we can't really say it was declining since 2016, but it was in decline, but it was starting back up and starting to improve before the pandemic, and then they just slid, which gives us a really bad look if we look back through the last years through 2016. But it's still we're scoring lower than 39 other states. 90% of the families choose public education, yet our current state superintendent of public instruction is choosing to fund public education in favor of vouchers. And this thing it just baffles the mind of the average person out here in Oklahoma is what's behind this? Is it Betsy DeVos? Is it Alex? Is it what other, defund movements that are popular? What do you think is taking place with that? And how do you think we should be addressing to change that narrative?
Well, I think first of all, Representative Dollens and Representative Turner are in the thick of it, and I'm sure they will have more specific plans. But I'll just tell you that when we looked at public education and higher education, I can't believe how we've made higher education funding a partisan issue these days and are just trying to strangle them off. But when we look at the funding of education in Oklahoma, we've just always underfunded it. It's just not been that much of a priority. And so back in the day, again in the early 90s, Steve Lewis, who was Speaker of the House, Marcia, and who's still around and active and writes columns. Steve Lewis helped organize, along with the Senate leadership, the passage of House Bill 1017, which was a hallmark piece of legislation lowering class sizes, increasing salaries for teachers, and doing lots and lots of other reforms, and increasing the funding. So they passed about 500, imagine this, in early 1990s, they passed about 500 million in taxes. The issue for us, it wasn't an issue at all, it was a great challenge for us, was it was $1 billion plan. Now imagine, again, in the early 1990s, they passed $1 billion plan, and we had to set out to fund it. And so they had funded with tax increases about 500 million. And we had to find I had to find $100 million of tax cuts, basically not tax cuts, but expense cuts, and then to try to build that budget. I sold the state airplane, I sold this, we were scrambling all the time, but every year we made that target. And at the end of my term, AP wrote a story that said public education funding had gone up 38% during those 4 years. Now think about that, 38%. At the end of Kevin Stitt's 4-year term, it had gone up 5%. Now, there was a big package of improvements that came along right after that, thanks to the insistence of our progressives on this call and others. But there was a big package that came along, and I think the overall increase was about 21%. But still, yet over 5 years, they've hit 27%. And it's a much bigger system with a lot more complexities than it was before. And so it runs to funding, number one, and then it runs to basic respect for the profession. I'm just, we're just all aghast every time Ryan Walters opens his mouth. I begged my wife to let me endorse him in his Republican primary for that office and declare that he was my nephew, hoping that would cause him difficulties in the Republican primary. She thought that was not a good idea, and so I didn't do that. But we are unrelated. I am thinking about putting up a billboard that has our two pictures side by side that just says "not related," and let it go at that. But I don't know what his game is. I thought his game was to, be wildly crazy, right wing, carve out that 35% in the Republican primary, and maybe give Gettner Drummond a run for his money when he runs for the nomination in an open seat. But then he shows up with $250 raised in the last quarter against a couple $100,000 that Gettner Drummond raised. So that may not be his game. I don't know what his game is. Surely he's not just being destructive for destructive's sake. It's hard for me to believe that he actually believes what he's saying, but maybe he does. It looks like he may be angling for some national fame or something else. But that's when you disrespect teachers. When you go after the Tulsa school district, which is not that different from the Oklahoma City school district, why are they just attacking Tulsa? It's like Governor Stitt and Ryan Walters both have it in for the superintendent or somebody else, all of whom are doing a fine job of trying to build those systems back. This is a very challenging, it's probably the hardest job in the state, being the head of one of these large public school districts. But we've got good leaders there, and if they have the resources, they'll make the progress that needs to be made. So it's fundamentally money and then not attacking them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You were talking about Tulsa, and he put out this statement about where Tulsa was at, and the fact checkers within hours were able to go back and disprove almost everything that he said. So I want to introduce you to one of the co-founders, or the other co-founder of Coffee with Democrats, a friend of mine, Steve Holcomb, attorney out of Pawhuska.
Hey, Steve.
Good morning, Governor. I'm not sure we crossed paths before, but I'm tickled to see you on, and I've followed your political career from back when you started back in the 80s. I was an assistant DA. I ran for DA then in Stillwater area around 2002. And so I've just always been interested in your career and the impact that you've had on the state, and appreciate you being on. I wanted to ask, you were touching on money, and you've got connections, of course. I believe you're tightly connected with the National Party, DNC. We had an interesting conversation with an individual by the name of David Pepper from Ohio last week. And I don't know if you know David, but he's been running for statewide offices there. He's a strong Democrat, progressive. And he's started an organization called Blue Ohio, where dollars are being chipped in that go to those counties or those seats in Ohio where Democrats haven't even been running, just to chip in a few dollars to just kind of prime the pump. And I'm wondering if that means anything to you in terms of any conversations you've had at the national level, if that's something you've heard of here in Oklahoma in terms of this problem that we have across the board, where we have so many seats that are just handed over to the Republicans because no Democrat is running.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, I'll tell you what the debate is, Steve, and as you already know, is that here we are. We've got enough progressives in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and Oklahoma County and Tulsa County, and we've got enough in CD5, and we're getting there in CD1. And so, do we concentrate on the blue dots and try to build them out? Make sure that we've got county and municipal officials. You know, the Tulsa mayor's race is going to boil down to two Democrats, probably. You know, Monroe Nichols, who's a wonderful guy, wonderful legislator and leader, and the county commissioner there, Karen Keith. They're both running for mayor. I wish only one was running, but you know, yeah, it's always a free for all in these open primaries. And so, so there's one argument that says, hey, we've got to stay focused on these blue dots where we've got reasonable chances of winning. And then the other side of this goes to, you know, the tug in my heart of a guy that nobody knew. I had 3% name ID and they were lying. I had no money. I didn't come from any wealthy, connected family. You know, I grew up on a poor dirt farm in Western Oklahoma and put myself through school. And I had a salaried job in Oklahoma City when I decided, by God, I'm going to run for governor. Well, that was just nutty. And I almost won in the first race and did win in the second race. So I'm the last one to begrudge somebody out in the most conservative area ever to run. But I think David Pepper, who I do know, has done a very good job. And I missed his seminar presentation here in Oklahoma that Alicia Andrews had organized and set up, and I'm so sorry that I missed that. But I think there needs to be that initiative and 10 others. I mean, I think we do need an initiative that concentrates on counties that have very low Democratic performance and that have folks who are losing heart and faith, and to give them some hope that we can prevail over time. You know, someday we'll get back to issues. Someday we'll be able to find the right way to communicate that convinces these people that they're voting against their interests. You know, one of the best books ever written about political messaging is What's the Matter with Kansas? Well, there's nothing the matter with Kansas now because they've got a Democratic governor and several Democratic leaders there. And but it was a study in why our populations vote against their interests. Rural Oklahoma votes against their interests. They've got a Republican majority that has done nothing for rural health care, has done nothing for connectivity, has done nothing for their educational system, and in fact has gone just the opposite, oftentimes doing things that are negative attacks, and yet they continue to vote in wide majorities for Republicans. You know, we've got to, as Pepper is doing, and as Alicia and others are working on at the party, we've got to continue to find ways to be present and outreach to those counties that are not well organized.
Well, I think that that's a wonderful answer. And Kevin and I started Coffee with Democrats. He's really made it his own here in 2023, and I'm so proud of him. But this was an issue that was at heart why he and I have become such great friends. And that is that rural Oklahoma is, I'm not telling you anything, is just being ignored. And there's got to be a lot of other David Walters here right now in a number of counties, maybe in every county in Oklahoma, that are thinking, hey, I might run for that county commissioner seat, or I might run for city council, and they just need a few dollars. So in no way am I suggesting that this is some sort of silver bullet, but
Yeah.
Our leadership is as much likely to come from rural Oklahoma with a little bit of help along the way, kind of spread the bets, as it is as to come from Oklahoma City or Tulsa.
Yeah, I think that's right. See, the one other caution I would make is that I was always of the theory, let's make sure there's a candidate in every race. You never know what's going to happen. You never know how they're going to perform. And I still tend to be of that mind. But oftentimes we'll spend so much time trying to find a candidate to run in a race that everybody knows there's no chance of winning. But and yet you don't want to dispirit them, but at the same time you want to be realistic about it. And so the candidates that we need to try to recruit and get out there are those candidates that are serious about running a campaign. Candidates to sign up and say, well, I can do this without any money. You can't do it without any money. Candidates that sign up and say, I can do this without any, hired help. I'm going to do it by myself and whatever. So you just have to have a really serious candidate. And when we find a good, strong, serious candidate, even if their odds are off, we need to try to do the best we can to support them. But we get a lot of grief for you didn't do enough for this person out in, Wapanucka or whatever. And yet, we're battling it out trying to win a county seat or municipal election or something else in areas where we can win, and to try to start rebuilding that base from the inside out. But I take your point. And while I'm at it, I thank you for being part of the founding group. And Kevin, thank you and your team for what you do with this program. I'm sorry it's been so long for me to get on this thing, but I appreciate what you do and the messages that you spread.
Well, thank you very much. We've grown. We're in 8 different states right now. We have capacity to grow into all of the different states and have chapters with Coffee with Democrats. And Lynn Fatica who's on here with us. He's our Georgia representative. He also is helped with Madeline Ryan Smith, who is running for Georgia House District 158. She's a good friend of ours, and she had a couple of things that she wanted to comment that I want to pass on to you, and that she did agree 100% with you when talking about there must be no uncontested races. We've got to stop doing that. And she also added a comment here about, we talk about this in Georgia, quality over quantity is important at times. So it is very important for us to have those connections. And that's what Coffee with Democrats does, is we try to connect blue dots all over the state of Oklahoma and all over the United States, is to try to have those conversations so that even though they may not feel like they're alone and they don't have the income or the finances to do what they're doing, we can help them, and we can help give them direction to who can help them. And just having those connections with other blue dots is important. So Representative Turner indicates, what do we mean by no money? Because I ran a race with no money and won. Granted that this was the left of a Dem, but we also have to start looking at bringing a new electorate to the table. And I appreciate her saying that. And I'll see if you have any comments about both of these great young people who are progressives in the respective states.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, I think I just
right.
want to add one second really
Yeah, go
quickly, because that's the third time I've been misgendered. So I want to make sure that folks
I
understand
am
that my
so
pronouns
sorry
are
about that.
they, them, theirs, and not she, her, for the folks who are watching this back.
Please accept my apologies. I'm trying very desperately not to allow that to happen, and I'm trying real hard not to do that. So I appreciate your grace and kindness, and please continue to correct me.
I think Representative Turner makes a good point. You don't need nearly the kind of resources if you've got if you've got some progressive balance or even a progressive majority in a district. And so those that are fortunate enough to have an opportunity to run and get nominated in a district that is a compacted urban district, it's more manageable. You can communicate somewhat easier, not nearly the amount of money. When I talk about candidates running with no money, it's those that will strike out on, say, a statewide campaign or some campaign that is just impossible to get there without having resources. And it's not like you can't raise them. I mean, no money, no name ID. I raised 1.8 million in 1986. It was just a shocker, but I literally would get on the phone and tell people, you don't know me, but here's why I'm running. And I'd like you to, make a contribution, et cetera. And so it's possible to do. It just is, it's mind-numbingly, disciplined, I guess. But we very much appreciate what Representative Turner has done and the district that she represents. It's a little bit easier to do that with less resources there, not to take anything away from her victory, but you don't need the kind of hard cash resources to get there. You just need to have the right messaging and be able to communicate.
And I think, again, so we recognize that that Representative Turner is they, them. We don't say what we say out of insult, and I'm so sorry if I come across as some dinosaur. I'm sorry that I make the gender statements that are improper, and please again continue to hold me to account and make sure that I continue to learn and grow, because that's the goal of what we do. We don't want to do anything to disenfranchise or alienate anybody. So thank you so much. Let's move on to a couple of the other questions. Here's a good one. The last Democrat president to visit Oklahoma was Jimmy Carter in the late 1970s. When do you think Oklahoma should be visited again by a Democrat president or other high-ranking Democrats in office? And where would you suggest that they go to have the greatest impact, motivation, and persuasion to increase Democrat voter turnout?
Well, Kevin, first of all, I think Bill Clinton was here at least twice while he was president. I remember 2 times in particular. Now, both of those were related to the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, and the other one was the Moore tornado, I think, was the occasion that he came in. So your question would have to be, when will they come without a disaster? But and then Barack Obama came to Cushing, Oklahoma, to talk about pipeline and refineries and all kinds of other things. It was kind of an unusual trip for him, but they have been here. But we compete with Wyoming and the Dakotas for being just the most blood red, maroon really, state in the nation. And so the tendency is that, and Representative Turner has pointed out that President Biden was here for the Tulsa Legacy Fest, which was a good thing. And I suspect we'll see President Biden back here. I think he's, first of all, he works as harder than anybody I've ever seen, regardless of age, and I'm guessing that he will make that effort. normally you'd see these Democratic presidents in a big challenge primary, and so he's not going to have that. So I suspect we'll see him anyway. But that's our status. If here's another thing I'd wave the wand on: Electoral College. If you could get rid of the Electoral College, the idea that the Electoral College allows small states to be better represented is just BS. And I've debated some of our Republican senators about this because they want to hang on to the Electoral College, obviously. And so as long as the Electoral